He thought losing his war dog was the wound God would never let him forget. Then a veterinarian called about Rook, a German Shepherd K9 lying beside his dead owner's coat, refusing to eat, refusing to live. But this old dog was not only mourning the man who loved him. He was guarding a truth buried for years beneath the Blackpine mine. When Rook's former handler returned to take him back, the dog's fear revealed something no report had ever told. A former Navy SEAL had to choose: walk away from another broken K9, or face the one memory that still haunted him. Tell us where you're watching from, and if Rook's story touches your heart, please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Reed Callahan, a 55-year-old former Navy SEAL, lived quietly in the Oregon mountains after years of keeping company with danger. His cabin sat at the edge of the pine woods, where mornings came slowly, with wet earth under the porch steps and pale mist drifting between the trees like breath from something sleeping. People in town knew Reed as a man who spoke only when words were useful. He fixed fences. He split firewood. He drank black coffee alone. At the small hardware store, he was polite but brief, the kind of man who could stand in a room without asking it to notice him. He stood about 6 feet tall, lean and strong, so in the way of men shaped by weather and discipline rather than vanity. His face was clean-shaven, showing a square jaw and high cheekbones that made him seem stern even when he was only tired. His dark brown hair was cut short in a military style, just a little longer than regulation now, as if age had granted him one small permission. The northern wind had darkened his fair skin over the years, and his gray-blue eyes carried a calm that did not feel soft. It felt earned. Reed had once worked beside military dogs. He had trusted them in places where men trusted almost nothing. He had believed a good dog could hear fear before a man admitted it, could find life beneath rubble, could stay beside a soldier longer than most promises. Then he lost Mako. Mako had been a war dog with a black muzzle, sharp ears, and a heart too loyal for the world that took him. Reed never spoke the details unless sleep had already failed him. He only knew that after that night, the sound of claws tapping on concrete could drag him backward faster than any bullet. And so he stayed away from K9 units, training yards, kennels, and anyone who said the word handler with too much pride. Then Laurel Ames called. Laurel ran a small working dog rehabilitation center on the edge of town. She was 42, with chestnut brown hair, usually tied low at the back of her neck, hazel eyes that looked gentle until someone mistook her kindness for weakness, and the practical build of a woman who had carried too many injured animals and too many worried owners through long nights. She wore a faded light olive work jacket over a cream thermal shirt, dark jeans, and brown boots scuffed by mud and disinfectant. She did not call Reed because he had once been dangerous. She called because the town elder, Walter Pike, had told her Reed understood dogs that had worked too long in hard places. And Walter was nearly 80, thin as a fence rail, with silver hair, a bent back, and the habit of speaking slowly enough that people listened before realizing they had been advised. He had told Laurel, "Call Reed. He knows the kind of silence that doesn't scare a wounded dog." At Laurel's center, there was an old German shepherd named Rook. Rook was not old by years alone. He was only 5, with a yellow and black coat, a dark saddle across his back, a black muzzle, and amber-brown eyes that had once missed very little. But grief had aged him. His ribs showed more than they should. His ears still stood, but not with the proud sharpness of a working dog waiting for the next command. They stood like 2 tired sentries guarding a ruined gate. Rook had been a search and rescue dog, one of the best in the county, and he had tracked missing hikers through snow, found an injured climber under fallen timber, and once stood at the mouth of an old mine shaft without flinching when grown men refused to step closer. But after his last owner, Graham Hale, died of a heart attack, Rook collapsed into himself. Graham had been a retired K-9 rescue chief, a tall, weathered man in his late 60s with silver-gray hair, kind eyes, and hands made rough by rope, rain, and years of quiet responsibility. He was the sort of man who never raised his voice to a dog unless danger was louder. To Rook, he had been more than an owner. Graham had been routine, safety, the smell of an old brown coat, the soft leash, the morning walk, the proof that the world could ask nothing from him for a while. Graham died on a cold morning after a night of rain, and he had pulled on his old weathered coat and taken Rook's soft leash from its hook, ready for their usual walk along the dirt road behind the cabin. Then his heart failed. He fell beside the porch steps, one hand still holding the leash. Rook was there. The German shepherd licked Graham's face, nudged his arm, and pulled gently at his sleeve. When Graham did not move, Rook ran to the dirt road and barked until his throat turned raw. Nearly an hour later, Ellen Ward heard him. Ellen was a 71-year-old widow who walked the forest road every morning, whether the sky was kind or not. She was small, with white hair tucked under a gray knit cap, warm brown eyes, and the careful steps of someone who had learned to trust weather more than calendars. At first, she thought Rook had cornered a raccoon or chased a deer too close to Graham's place, but then she saw him standing in the road, wet with mist, eyes wild, running a few steps toward the cabin before turning back to make sure she followed. Ellen understood. She followed Rook through the dripping pines and found Graham lying by the porch. She called the ambulance, but by the time help arrived, Graham was gone. To the humans, Rook had done everything right. He had called for help. He had found someone. He had not abandoned Graham. But to Rook, only one fact remained. Graham did not get up. After that morning, Rook stopped eating. He refused walks. He lay beside Graham's old coat at Laurel's center, his nose pressed near the sleeve where the smell was strongest. He did not growl, he did not bite. He did not make trouble. He simply withdrew from the world, one breath at a time. Laurel tried everything. Soft food, warm broth, medical checks, quiet therapy sessions, short walks under the pines. She sat outside his room for hours, speaking softly, then not speaking at all when silence seemed kinder. She placed Graham's coat beside him each night, hoping the familiar scent would comfort him. But Rook kept fading. 3 nights before Laurel called Reed, the center's motion camera caught something strange. At 2:17 in the morning, Rook rose from beside Graham's coat. He had not stood on his own for nearly a day. He moved slowly to the window at the end of the recovery room and stared north toward the dark line of trees. He stood there for 7 minutes, trembling, ears lifted, as if listening to a sound no human could hear. Then he returned to the coat, lowered himself beside it, and did not move again until sunrise. Laurel watched the footage 4 times. She could not explain it. That was when she called Reed. Reed almost said no before she finished asking. His hand tightened around the phone. He looked out from his cabin porch at the wet pines and felt an old door open inside him, the one he had nailed shut after Mako. He did not want to sit beside another working dog. He did not want to see loyalty ruined by loss. He did not want to remember the weight of a collar returned without the dog who wore it. But Laurel sent him a photo. In it, Rook lay beside Graham's coat on a clean blanket, his yellow and black body curled tight, his amber eyes open but empty. The dog did not look asleep. He looked as if he had decided the world no longer had a place for him. Reed stared at the photo for a long time. Then he drove to the center. When Reed arrived, he did not enter like a hero. He stood outside Rook's room for nearly a full minute, saying nothing, and the air smelled of pine cleaner, wet fur, and the faint sourness of uneaten food. Inside, Rook lay beside the faded coat. His body had thinned from days of refusing meals. He did not bark. He did not lift his head. His silence felt heavier than a cry. Laurel stood beside Reed, arms folded tightly, her face worn from lack of sleep. "He saved a lot of people," she said. Reed looked at the old dog and answered quietly, "Dogs like that usually don't know what to do when they're the ones who need saving." He stepped into the room slowly enough that even the floor seemed to forgive the weight of him. He did not say Rook's name. He did not whistle. He did not reach out his hand. He did not offer a command wrapped in kindness. He simply sat on the floor several feet away. Then he breathed. Slowly, evenly, as if he were telling the room that nothing here had to happen quickly. Minutes passed. Laurel stayed by the door. Reed kept his eyes low, not staring at Rook, not challenging him, not asking him to become brave for another human being. Rook did not eat. He did not come closer. But after a long while, one amber eye shifted toward Reed. It was not trust. Not yet. It was only the smallest proof that some part of Rook still knew the world was there. For Laurel, that was the first sign of life she had seen in days. For Reed, it was something more dangerous. It was the first sign that the grief he had spent years avoiding had not died. It had only been waiting for the right dog to call it back. That night, after Reed left and the center settled into darkness, Laurel stayed late to check on Rook. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The hallway lights hummed. Rook lay beside Graham's coat, his eyes half closed. Then the phone rang. Laurel picked it up, no one spoke, and there was only one short whistle on the other end of the line. Rook's body went rigid. The old German shepherd curled tight against Graham's coat, shaking as if something from the past had just stepped through the door. The next morning came gray and low, with clouds dragging over the Oregon pines like old wool. Reed returned to Laurel's rehabilitation center before 8. He had not slept well. He would not have admitted that to anyone, not even to himself, but his eyes carried the flat stillness of a man who had spent the night listening to memories move around in the dark. Laurel met him in the hallway outside Rook's room. Her hair was tied lower than usual, and a loose strand had fallen across her cheek. She looked like someone who had been strong for too many hours in a row. "You should know who had him first," she said. Reed did not ask who she meant. He only looked through the small window in the door. Rook lay beside Graham Hale's old coat, his yellow and black body curled tightly around the faded cloth. His amber eyes were open, but they were not fixed on Reed this time, and they were fixed on the north wall, as if something beyond it had his attention. Laurel led Reed into her small office, a cramped room lined with medical charts, old leashes, donated blankets, and framed photographs of dogs who had recovered enough to go home. She opened a folder and placed it on the desk. "Before Graham," she said, "Rook belonged to Dane Varick." The name sat in the room like a cold tool. Laurel explained that Dane had been Rook's first handler in the county search and rescue K9 unit. Years ago, people in town had spoken of Dane and Rook almost as if they were one creature with two bodies. Dane read terrain with a tracker's eye and Rook read the invisible world beneath it. Together, they had found missing hikers in blizzards, an injured logger under a collapsed cedar, and a child's father who had fallen into a ravine during a late-season storm. Dane had been admired then. He was around 50 now, tall and hard-built, with the narrow strength of a man who had spent more years outdoors than indoors. His face was angular, with a long jaw, pale eyes, and short dark hair threaded with gray at the temples. He usually shaved, Laurel said, but never closely enough to hide the faint shadow along his mouth. There was something controlled about him, too controlled, as if every movement had been measured before it was allowed to happen. He wasn't always cruel, Laurel said. Reed listened without moving. That's the difficult part, she continued. People remember the version of him who came home with lost people alive. They don't want to believe that same man could become dangerous. According to Laurel, everything changed after a rescue at Blackpine, an abandoned mining site north of town. She did not know every detail. Graham had never told her enough. But after Blackpine, Rook began to resist commands. He would pull toward the northern trail. He would freeze at certain sounds. He stopped responding to Dane the way he once had. Dane did not treat those changes as fear. He treated them as disobedience. Graham Hale, then the retired chief advisor for the county K-9 rescue program, saw what was happening. Graham did not have enough proof to make a public accusation, but he had enough authority to intervene. He took Rook out of Dane's hands, first as temporary care, then permanently. That's when Rook became Graham's dog, Laurel said. Not a tool, not a badge, a dog. Reed looked down at the folder. Inside was a copy of an old newspaper clipping. Dane stood in the snow beside a younger Rook. Rook's ears were high, his body strong, his eyes bright with the alert confidence of a working dog. Dane's gloved hand rested on the dog's shoulder. To anyone else, it might have looked like trust. To Reed, it looked like possession. Laurel took him later that morning to see Nora Whitcomb, the attorney who had handled Graham's papers. Nora's office sat above the town pharmacy, where the stairs creaked and smelled faintly of dust, ink, and winter coats. Nora was in her late 40s, tall, neat, and composed, with ash-blonde hair cut into a sharp bob and gray eyes that did not waste themselves on guessing. She wore a dark blue wool coat over a cream turtleneck, and every paper on her desk seemed placed with intention. She had the manner of a woman who had spent years watching grief turn into arguments over property, and had learned to keep her voice calm because somebody in the room always needed one steady thing. Graham was clear, Nora said, sliding a document across the desk. If he died or became unable to care for Rook, custody transferred to Laurel Ames and her rehabilitation center. Dane Varick has no legal claim. Then why is this still a problem? Reed asked. Nora gave him a look that was tired but not surprised. Because law is one thing, she said. Small towns are another. By noon, Reed understood what she meant. Dane Varick appeared in town like a man who knew exactly how he would be seen. He stood outside Miller's diner with a folded newspaper tucked under one arm and a leather leash looped through his fingers. His charcoal work jacket was clean, his boots polished against the mud, and his posture straight enough to make older men nod before they thought about why. He did not shout. He did not pound on doors. He smiled sadly when people approached him, and sadness, Reed knew, could be a very persuasive disguise. Reed watched from across the street as Dane spoke with a couple near the diner entrance. The woman held Dane's hand in both of hers. The man touched Dane's shoulder and shook his head as if offering sympathy after a funeral. Laurel stood beside Reed, her mouth drawn tight. They remember him, she said. They remember the version that made them feel safe, Reed replied. Inside the diner, Dane had already become the center of a quiet circle. Photographs lay on the table before him. In one, young Rook stood chest-deep in snow beside a rescue team. In another, Dane knelt next to him after what looked like a successful search. The dog in those pictures looked strong, focused, full of purpose, not like the animal lying beside a dead man's coat. Dane told the room that Rook had been his partner, and he said Graham had taken Rook during a difficult period. But Graham was gone now, and a working dog deserved to return to the person who understood him. His voice was low, controlled, almost humble. That made it worse. When Reed approached, Dane looked up before anyone introduced them. "You're Callahan," Dane said. Reed sat across from him without being invited. "You're Varric." Dane smiled slightly. "Laurel brought in a seal for an old dog?" "She brought in someone who knows when a dog is being pushed too hard." The smile did not leave Dane's face, but something behind his eyes tightened. "Rook doesn't need pity," Dane said. "He needs structure. He was a rescue dog, a good one. You don't heal an animal like that by letting him rot beside a coat." A few people in the diner shifted uncomfortably. Reed kept his voice quiet. "And if Rook doesn't want to go with you?" Dane answered too quickly. "He's a working dog. He doesn't know what he wants. He knows what he's trained to do." There it was. Not love. Not grief. Control dressed in cleaner clothes. For a moment, Reed saw Mako in his mind, not as he had been at the end, but before that. Bright-eyed. Ready. Waiting for a signal from a man he trusted. Reed pushed the memory down before it could open all the way. Laurel stepped closer to the table. "Rook is under my care, legally." Dane turned to her with a gentleness so thin it was almost sharper than anger. "And how much has he eaten under your care, Doctor?" The room went still. Laurel's face paled, but she did not look away. Reed rose before the silence could become Dane's weapon. "We're done here." Dane leaned back in his chair. "No," he said softly. "Oh, we're not." That afternoon, Reed returned to the center with Laurel. He had expected Rook to be in the same place beside Graham's coat. Instead, the dog was standing, not steadily, not well, but standing. A delivery truck had stopped on the road beyond the fence, its old engine coughing black smoke. A loose chain knocked against the metal bed with a hard, uneven rhythm. The sound carried across the yard. Rook's ears lifted, his body stiffened. Then, with sudden urgency, he moved toward the north side of the room. Not away from the noise, toward it, toward the fence, toward the dark strip of forest beyond the center. Laurel hurried to the doorway. "Rook?" The dog did not look at her. Reed stepped inside, but he did not block him. He watched the old German shepherd press his nose toward the window, trembling, his breath fogging the glass. And it was not the trembling of a dog afraid of punishment. It was the trembling of a dog recognizing a road. For one brief second, Rook lifted one front paw and held it there, suspended in the air, as if his body remembered a command his heart could not bear to obey. Then he let out a sound so low Reed almost missed it. Not a growl, not a whine, a warning. Laurel covered her mouth with one hand. Reed looked past Rook, past the fence, past the wet pines. "What's north of here?" he asked. Laurel did not answer right away. When she did, her voice had changed. "Blackpine." That evening, Reed sat alone in Laurel's records room with the old Blackpine file spread across the table. Most of it was ordinary rescue paperwork. Dates, weather conditions, search grids, safety notes, names of responders. But one photograph held him longer than the others. It showed Dane and Rook near the mouth of a collapsed mine passage. The picture had been taken at an angle, perhaps by someone moving in a hurry. Rain blurred part of the frame. Men in helmets stood near floodlights. Dane's back was half turned. Rook was pulling hard toward a side entrance covered with brush and broken beams. Not wandering, not confused. Pulling. Reed had worked with enough dogs to know the difference. Below the photograph, the report stated that the K9 had failed to maintain the scent trail. Reed read the line twice. Then he looked again at Rook in the photograph, young and strong, straining toward the dark. A good search dog did not pull like that for nothing. And for the first time since arriving at Laurel's Center, Reed wondered whether Rook's greatest wound had not come from losing Graham at all. Maybe it had started long before. And maybe at Blackpine the dog had not failed anyone. Maybe the humans had failed him first. By the time Reed left Laurel's records room, the rain had stopped, but the town still looked wet enough to remember it. He drove north before the streets were fully awake, past the diner where men in work jackets lifted coffee cups like they were preparing for another ordinary day, past the feed store, past the road sign that pointed toward the old rail line. The Blackpine file lay on the passenger seat, folded closed, though Reed could still see the photograph in his mind. Rook pulling. Dane turning away. A report saying the dog had lost the scent. Reed did not like mysteries that depended on old paper. Paper could be edited. Men could phrase cowardice as caution. But dogs, when trained well, did not lie to protect themselves. The man Reed went to see was named Owen Sutter. Owen had once been a volunteer rescue worker for the county. One of the men called out when hikers vanished. Trucks slid off mountain roads, or old mine shafts reminded the town that the earth could still open its mouth. He was 73 now, narrow-shouldered and bent slightly to one side, with thin white hair, pale blue eyes, and hands swollen by arthritis. His face had the leathery look of a man who had spent too many years in bad weather and had not complained enough to be memorable. He lived in a small house near the abandoned rail spur, where blackberry vines climbed the fence and a rusted wind chime hung over the porch without making a sound. When Reed knocked, Owen opened the door only halfway. "You're Callahan," Owen said. Reed nodded. "You were at Blackpine." Owen's mouth tightened. "Oh, a lot of men were at Blackpine. I'm asking about the dog." For a moment, Owen's eyes lost their guardedness. Not all of it, but enough for Reed to see that the name still had weight. Owen stepped back. Inside, the house smelled of old coffee, wood smoke, and liniment. A wall of framed photographs showed rescue teams from years past. Men in helmets, muddy trucks, floodlights in snow. In one photo near the corner, a younger Dane Varick stood beside Rook. Owen had turned that frame slightly toward the wall, as if he had grown tired of seeing it, but could not bring himself to throw it away. They sat at the kitchen table. Owen poured coffee without asking Reed if he wanted any. His hand shook a little, but not from fear. It was the ordinary tremor of age, the kind that came after a body had lifted too many stretchers and carried too much guilt. "Blackpine was bad ground," Owen said. "Always was. Men made money from it until the mountain started charging them back." He told Reed about the night the call came in. Caleb Rusk, a former mine worker who still knew the old service paths, had gone into the area after heavy rain. Some said he had been checking on illegal dumping near the lower entrance. Others said he had simply been walking where a grieving man should not walk alone. Either way, a section of old tunnel gave way. Caleb disappeared into the dark. Caleb was 49, Owen said. Lean fellow. Brown hair going gray too early. Quiet. His wife, Miriam, used to say he apologized to chairs when he bumped into them. Not the kind of man trouble usually picked. But trouble doesn't always ask. The rescue team arrived after midnight. Floodlights went up. Rain came down hard. Water ran through the mine paths like something alive. Old timbers cracked under pressure. The air smelled of iron, wet stone, diesel, and the sour breath of sealed earth. Dane brought Rook. Back then, Rook had still been in his prime. Owen remembered him clearly. A strong yellow and black German shepherd with a dark saddle across his back, bright amber eyes, and the steady forward focus of a dog who had never learned to doubt his own nose. Rook did not waste movement. When he worked, Owen said, every part of him seemed aimed at the hidden life ahead. He picked up something, Owen said. Reed did not interrupt. Owen looked down into his coffee. Not at the main collapse. That's what people forget. Everyone was looking at the main collapse because that was where the debris was freshest. But Rook kept pulling east, toward the auxiliary drift. The side entrance, Reed said. Owen glanced up sharply. Reed did not explain how he knew, and Owen leaned back into his chair. There was a steel brace there. Old yellow paint on it, most of it chipped away. Rook kept going for it. Dane called him back twice. Third time, Rook pulled hard enough that Dane had to plant his feet. The room became very quiet. Outside, a truck rolled along the wet road, tires hissing over gravel. Owen said the east drift was unstable. That much was true. The ceiling had shifted. Water was rising. No one wanted to send men deeper into a dead mine with a second collapse threatening above them. But Owen remembered something else. He remembered Rook refusing to settle. The dog did not circle in confusion. He did not lose interest. He faced the east drift and held the line. That was not failure. Any rescuer with eyes should have known that. Dane said conditions were too dangerous, Owen said. And maybe he was right. I've told myself that for years, but then the report changed. Reed's eyes narrowed. Changed how? Owen pushed himself up from the chair and went to a cabinet by the stove. From a tin box behind a stack of old manuals, he pulled a folded page in a plastic sleeve. He set it on the table. It was not an official copy, more like a field note, rough, water-stained, written in pencil. Reed read the line twice. K9 indication toward East Auxiliary Drift. Access unsafe. Unable to confirm. That was not the same as the final report. Owen tapped one crooked finger beside the words. That was the first note. Later, the language softened, then shortened. By the time it became part of the final file, it said the dog failed to maintain the trail. Who changed it? Owen did not answer quickly. That was answer enough. At the rehabilitation center, Laurel was cleaning Rook's water bowl when Reed returned. She looked up and knew from his face that he had found something. They moved into the feed room, where sacks of kibble were stacked beside towels and disinfectant. Reed showed her the copied field note Owen had allowed him to photograph. Laurel read it once, then again. Her hand went slowly to her throat. All these years, she whispered, Rook was blamed for losing him. Not just blamed, Reed said, corrected for remembering. The words struck harder than he expected. Laurel looked toward the hallway, where Rook lay in his room beside Graham's coat. Graham told me Rook had a bad mission, He never told me this. Maybe he didn't know all of it. Or maybe he knew enough and didn't have proof. There was no accusation in Laurel's voice. Only the tired grief of someone realizing that kindness sometimes arrives late because people with power kept the door locked. Reed stepped into the hallway and looked through Rook's window. The dog was awake. His amber eyes were fixed on Reed, not with trust yet, but with a strange steadiness, as if he knew something had shifted in the building. Reed stood there longer than he meant to. Mako came back to him then, not as a full memory, but in pieces. A broken wall, smoke, a command to pull back. The scrape of his own boots leaving ground he had wanted to return to. Men had told him later that the call was right, necessary, tactical. Reed had nodded. Then he had carried the silence home and fed it for years. That afternoon, Laurel brought a folded blanket into Rook's room. She did not speak at first. She sat on the floor or near the door, while Reed stood against the far wall. Rook did something neither of them expected. He lifted his head, sniffed the air, and slowly pushed himself upright. His legs trembled, and his body was weak from grief and hunger. But he turned away from Graham's coat for the first time since Reed had arrived. Not far, only a few inches. Then Rook placed one paw on the edge of the coat and looked toward the north-facing window. Laurel stopped breathing. It was not recovery. Not yet. But it was not surrender either. For a brief moment, the old dog looked less like a creature waiting beside the dead, and more like a witness who had heard his name called from far away. Reed felt the hair rise along the back of his neck. Because Rook was not asking for food. He was not asking for comfort. He was asking, in the only language he had left, whether someone was finally going to listen. By evening, Reed and Laurel had decided not to push him. No field trips, no tests, no attempt to make the dog prove anything. Rook had been forced to carry enough of other people's decisions, and for now, they would let him rest. The center settled into its usual night rhythm. One dog barked twice in the east kennel and went quiet. Rainwater dripped from the gutters. Laurel made notes in Rook's file with slower handwriting than usual. At 9:34, the motion light near the rear gate came on. Reed saw it through the feed room window. He was outside before Laurel could ask what happened. The rear gate stood closed. The lock had not been cut. No footprints showed clearly in the wet gravel because the rain had begun again, light but steady. Whoever had been there knew where the camera's blind spot began. Reed did not like that. Near the lower hinge, partly shielded by weeds, lay a dark canvas pouch. Reed did not touch it with bare hands. Laurel came up behind him, breath visible in the cold air. "What is it?" she asked. Reed used a clean towel to open the pouch. Inside lay an old leather leash, cracked with age, and a small black stone, rough and damp, with a streak of yellow paint dried along one side. Laurel went pale. Before either of them spoke, a sound came from inside the building. Low, long, wounded. Rook had smelled it. The howl moved through the center like grief finding a voice at last. Laurel took one step toward the door, then stopped, one hand pressed against her mouth. Reed looked down at the black stone in the towel. He no longer believed Dane only wanted Rook back. Someone had brought Blackpine to the dog's door, and whatever had been buried there had just been called by name. Morning came with a white sky and the smell of wet pine. Reed did not go first to Blackpine. He had learned, through war and through age, that men made mistakes when they chased the loudest clue too quickly. A frightened dog could point north. An old record could turn sour in a man's hands. But the truth usually had quieter doors. So he went to the woman who had heard Rook barking on the morning Graham Hale died. Ellen Ward lived in a small blue house near the old county road, where the pines thinned just enough for pale light to reach the windows. Her porch was swept clean. A pair of muddy walking shoes sat beside the door. Wind chimes made of old spoons hung above the railing and moved gently in the cold air. Ellen opened the door before Reed knocked twice. She was 71, small and spare, with white hair pinned under a gray wool cap and a face softened by age, but not weakened by it. Her brown eyes had the warmth of a kitchen lamp left burning for someone late to come home. She wore a thick gray cardigan over a cream blouse, dark trousers, and walking shoes with mud dried along the edges. There was nothing dramatic about her, but Reed could see at once that she was the kind of woman who noticed what others stepped over. "You're Reed Callahan," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Laurel called. Said you might come." Ellen opened the door wider. "If this is about Rook, you'd better have coffee." The kitchen smelled of cinnamon, black coffee, and old wood. Ellen poured 2 cups, then sat across from Reed without asking many questions. And she looked tired when Rook's name came up, not because she was annoyed by the memory, but because some mornings never finished happening. "He wasn't running wild," she said. "That's what I keep telling people. Rook wasn't just barking at nothing." She folded her hands around her cup. "That morning I was walking past Graham's road. Cold morning. Fog still low. I heard Rook before I saw him. At first I thought he'd treed something. Then he came out onto the road." Ellen looked toward the window as if she could still see him there. He was soaked, mud on his legs, eyes wide. He ran toward me, then back toward the house, then toward me again, not panicked like a stray dog. He was guiding me. Reed said nothing. He had seen working dogs do that. A good one did not waste movement when someone needed saving. "When I got to the porch," Ellen continued, "Graham was down beside the steps. A Rook kept touching his hand with his nose. Gentle, like he was trying to wake him without hurting him." Her voice lowered. "I called the ambulance. I did chest compressions until my arms shook. Rook stood close the whole time. Never got in the way. Never barked at me. Just watched Graham's face." Ellen took a careful breath. "And when they said he was gone, the dog made a sound I hope I never hear again." Reed looked down at his coffee. There were sounds that stayed. Men made them. Dogs made them. Sometimes the woods made them after a storm. The worst ones were not loud. They simply found a place inside a person and remained there. "Rook did everything right," Reed said. Ellen nodded, but her eyes filled. "I know that. You know that. Laurel knows that. But does he?" The question hung between them. Reed had no easy answer. Ellen rose slowly and went to a drawer near the stove, and she pulled out a small envelope, worn from being handled too many times. "Graham gave me this 3 months before he passed," she said. "Told me if anything happened, I was to make sure Rook went to Laurel, not Dane, never Dane." Reed took the envelope but did not open it yet. Ellen watched him closely. Graham was afraid that man would come back. Did he say why? Not enough. Her mouth tightened. Graham was careful. Too careful, maybe. He said Dane had a way of loving a dog like a man grips a rope over a cliff. Said it looked like devotion until you saw what happened when the rope tried to move. That sounded like Graham, Reed thought. A good man trying to warn without accusing. A man who knew truth needed proof, and proof had not been generous. Before Reed left, Ellen touched his sleeve. Rook called me that morning, she said. If you remember anything, remember that. And he called for help. He did not leave Graham alone. Reed carried those words back to Laurel. By noon, he and Laurel were in Nora Whitcomb's office again. Nora listened to Ellen's account with her hands folded over Graham's file. She had traded her wool coat for a dark blazer, but her careful composure had not changed. She looked like a woman who trusted signatures more than tears because signatures held up better in court. Nora opened Graham's sealed envelope. Inside were the official transfer papers, already familiar, and a smaller packet of handwritten notes. Graham's writing was firm but uneven, the script of an older man whose hand still wanted to be strong. Most of the notes concerned Rook's care. No choke leads, no sharp whistles, no short-line drills. Avoid metal chain noise. Keep Graham's coat with him during storms. Then there was a page labeled simply, Blackpine. Graham had written that the original report never sat right with him. Rook's behavior afterward suggested unresolved indication, not scent failure. Dane becomes agitated when Blackpine is mentioned. Dog attempts northward pull when exposed to diesel, wet rope, and stone dust. Laurel read the words with her face turned slightly away, as if shame had entered the room, and she did not want to give it a chair. I should have known, she whispered. Nora's voice softened. Graham protected you from what he couldn't prove. Laurel, Reed said, you treated what you could see. She pressed one hand over the notes. And what I couldn't see was eating him alive. The next stop was harder. Miriam Rusk lived outside town in a small house set back from a narrow lane, where brown grass bent beneath the wind and an old pickup sat unused near the shed. And she was 49, slender and pale, with dark brown hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck, and gray-brown eyes that looked as though they had learned to hold back whole seasons of grief. She wore a deep burgundy sweater under a worn gray-brown coat, and her hands were thin, restless, always folding and unfolding the corner of a dish towel. When Reed introduced himself, she did not invite him in right away. People who had lost someone without a body learned to fear visitors. Visitors often brought either pity or unfinished pain. Neither was easy to set down. Laurel spoke gently. Mrs. Rusk, this is about Caleb, and about the dog from Blackpine. At that, Miriam's face changed. Not much, just enough. She let them in. Her living room was tidy but still. A framed photograph of Caleb stood on a side table, and he had been a lean man with tired, kind eyes, brown hair already threaded with gray, and the slight stoop of someone who had worked underground and learned to keep his head low. In the photo, he smiled as if he was not used to being looked at directly. Miriam sat across from them. I was told the dog lost him, she said. Reed's voice stayed quiet. We're not sure that's true. She did not cry. That was worse somehow. She only stared at him, her face becoming very still, as if one wrong movement might break the room open. Laurel explained what they knew: the field note, Graham's doubts, Rook's behavior. She did not offer certainty. She offered only the shape of a question that had waited too long. Miriam stood abruptly and went into the hallway. For a moment, Reed thought she was asking them to leave. Instead, she returned with a small metal lighter in her palm. Oh, Caleb carried this everywhere, she said. Silly thing. Didn't smoke much after we got married, but he said an old miner should always have fire on him, even if only to remind the dark it wasn't in charge. The lighter was scratched, dull silver, with the initials CR carved crookedly on one side. Miriam held it out. Reed took it carefully. Back at the center, Rook was lying beside Graham's coat when Reed entered the room with Laurel. Reed did not bring the lighter close at first. He sat several feet away and placed it on a clean towel between them. Rook's nose moved, his ears lifted. Then the old German shepherd did something that made Laurel cover her mouth. He did not recoil. He did not shake. He pushed himself up with effort, stepped away from Graham's coat, and lowered his chest to the floor before the lighter. His breathing grew heavy, but his eyes were not wild, rather they were focused, tender almost. Then, slowly, Rook crawled toward the door, not away from fear, toward memory. Reed felt the room change around him. A dog could not tell a court what he knew. He could not name the dead or accuse the living. But in that moment, Rook's body spoke with a terrible clarity. He remembered Caleb Rusk, and whatever had happened at Blackpine, it had not ended for him. By late afternoon, Reed and Laurel made a decision. They would not force Rook into a search. They would not make him perform old work for human comfort. But they would take him to the Northern Trail, only as far as he chose to go. The path behind the center was damp and narrow, winding through fir and pine. Blackpine lay about 20 minutes away on foot if a person moved steadily, longer with an exhausted dog. Reed kept the leash loose. Laurel walked beside them with a small medical bag and a bottle of water. Rook moved slowly. Every few yards he stopped, breathing hard. His legs trembled, but he did not turn back. The forest grew quieter as they approached the old mine land. Birds thinned out. The ground darkened. The trees stood closer together, their lower branches scraping one another in the wind. Then Rook stopped. Ahead, half hidden by brush, was the mouth of an old auxiliary drift. Rotten beams leaned over it. Moss covered the stones. Yellow paint flaked from a bent steel brace just inside the shadows. Rook stared at it. His whole body shook. Reed did not pull him closer. Laurel knelt beside the trail, tears standing in her eyes. "It's all right," she whispered, though none of them knew whether that was true. Rook lifted one paw, held it in the air, then lowered it again. He let out a breath that sounded too old for a 5-year-old dog. Reed's phone vibrated unknown number, and he opened the message. "If you care about the dog, stop making him remember." Reed looked toward the dark mouth of the old mine, then back at Rook. For the first time, the question sharpened into something colder than suspicion. Whoever sent that message was not afraid that Rook would suffer. They were afraid that Rook would lead someone to the right place. By noon the next day, Dane Varick's video had reached half the town. It began with snow. Not the wet gray snow that came late in the Oregon mountains, but clean winter snow from years before, the kind that made everything look honest. In the video, a younger Rook moved through it with power and certainty, his yellow and black coat bright against the white, his ears sharp, his body low and focused. Dane's voice came from behind the camera, calm and firm. "Search." Rook moved like an arrow. The video cut to a rescue team pulling a man from a ravine, then to Dane kneeling beside Rook, one gloved hand on the dog's neck, then to an old newspaper headline praising the county's K9 unit. By itself, the video did not lie. That was what made it dangerous. It showed a truth, but not the whole truth. It showed Rook when he was young, strong, obedient, and useful, and it did not show the dog trembling beside Graham Hale's coat. It did not show the years after Blackpine. It did not show what happened when a working dog became too wounded to keep serving the story people wanted from him. Dane posted it with a short message. Rook deserves to remember who he is. By evening, people were sharing it from the diner, the feed store, the church parking lot, and the county rescue forum. Some wrote that Dane looked heartbroken. Others asked why Laurel Ames was keeping a famous rescue dog locked away. A few called Reed Callahan an outsider with a hero complex, even though Reed had lived near the town longer than most of them had owned their houses. Laurel read the comments once, then closed the laptop. Her face had gone still. She stood in her office wearing the same light olive work jacket she had worn for 3 days. Her chestnut hair tied back carelessly, the skin beneath her eyes faintly shadowed. She had the look of a woman who could handle blood, broken bones, and frightened animals, but not the slow cruelty of people who had never sat beside the creature they were judging. "They think I'm letting him die," she said. Reed stood by the window. Outside, Rook lay in the recovery yard under the covered overhang, Graham's old coat folded beside him. The dog had eaten 2 bites of soft food that morning. 2 bites had felt like a victory before the town decided victories needed to look better on camera. "They're seeing what Dane wants them to see," Reed said. Laurel gave a tired laugh with no humor in it. "That doesn't make it hurt less." A knock came from the hallway. Tessa Lang, one of Laurel's younger assistants, stepped in holding an envelope. Tessa was 26, short and freckled, with reddish-brown hair pulled into a messy bun and the nervous energy of someone still learning that kindness alone could not shield her from ugly people. She wore gray scrubs under a denim jacket and had been brave all week until the town turned its teeth toward the center. "This was at the front gate," she said. Laurel opened it. No signature, only a printed line. "Give the dog back before you ruin him." Tessa's eyes filled. "Are they going to sue us?" Laurel folded the note slowly. "No." But her voice was not as certain as she wanted it to be. By late afternoon, one donor had withdrawn funding for the center's winter heating repairs. Another asked for a full review of Rook's condition, and a local blog posted an article titled, "Is a rescue hero being kept from his handler?" Dane never had to shout. The town was doing it for him. Reed watched Laurel move through the kennel rooms, checking water bowls, cleaning mats, touching each dog gently as she passed. She did not cry. That would have been easier to witness. Instead, she became quieter, and Reed knew that kind of quiet. It was how strong people bled when they did not want anyone to slip in it. Near sunset, Deputy Miles Keene arrived. Miles was 34, broad-shouldered but not heavy, with sandy brown hair cut short, a clean-shaven face and eyes that had not yet learned to hide every doubt. He wore a dark navy duty jacket over a gray thermal shirt, black tactical pants, and boots still wet from the road. And he had the alert posture of a good small-town deputy, but also the careful hesitation of a man walking into a room where everyone expected him to choose a side. "I'm not here to accuse anyone," Miles said. Reed looked at him. "Good start." Miles did not smile. "Dane filed a complaint. Says the center is denying him access to property he trained and helped certify. Laurel has custody papers." "I know." "Then why are you here?" Miles glanced toward Rook, who lay beyond the glass with his head down, but his eyes open. "Because people are calling the station. Because Dane still has half the county remembering him as the man who brought their loved ones home. And because Blackpine has started coming up." At the name, Laurel looked sharply at him. Miles saw it and lowered his voice. "My father was on that rescue team," he said. The room changed, and Miles Keene's father, Aaron Keene, had been a local legend in his own smaller way. Reed had seen the name in the Blackpine file. A team lead. A respected man. Dead now, but still polished by town memory. Miles looked down at his hat. I grew up hearing that everyone did what they could that night. Maybe they did, Reed said. Miles looked up. That doesn't sound like agreement. It's not accusation either. For a moment, the two men stood with the space between them filled by fathers, dogs, and old decisions nobody wanted to inherit. Then, from the recovery room, Rook rose. No one called him. No one moved. The old German shepherd walked slowly to the glass door that faced the yard. His legs trembled, but his eyes were fixed beyond the fence, where the northern road curved behind the trees. Instead of barking, Rook pressed his forehead against the glass and lifted one paw, and he held it there. A trained indication. Not for food, not for attention. For something only he still seemed able to sense. Miles stared at him. That's not a dying dog, the deputy whispered. Reed's voice was low. No, that's a witness nobody has been able to question. Miles looked disturbed by the words, but he did not argue. The next morning, he called in help. Sergeant Dana Holt arrived from the Oregon State Police just after 10. She was 40, compact and strong, with dark brown hair tied low, sharp gray eyes, and a face that had learned to remain unreadable without becoming cold. She wore a charcoal patrol jacket, black field pants, and boots clean enough to show discipline, but scuffed enough to show she had used them. When she shook Reed's hand, her grip was brief and exact. I understand this started as a custody dispute over a dog, she said. Laurel answered before Reed could. It didn't start there. It only looked that way. Holt listened, really listened. She read Graham's custody papers. She reviewed Owen Sutter's field note. She looked at Dane's video, the anonymous note, the donor complaints, the gate footage, and the old rescue file. She did not make a speech. She simply placed each piece on the table until the room no longer looked like a place of emotion, but a place of pattern. Deputy Keene has a conflict if Blackpine becomes part of the active inquiry, she said. Miles stiffened, then nodded. I know. That doesn't remove you, Holt said. It just means you don't carry it alone. For the first time since Reed met him, Miles looked slightly less alone. Later that day, Reed found Dane waiting near the gravel lot behind the center. Dane stood beside his truck, hands in the pockets of his charcoal jacket, his face drawn, his pale eyes reddened around the edges. He looked less polished than he had at the diner, more human, more dangerous. You think I'm a monster, Dane said. I think you want something that isn't yours. Dane laughed once bitterly. You know what Rook was before me? Potential. Noise. Instinct without direction. I gave him purpose. Reed stayed still. Dane's voice softened. You ever lose the one thing that kept you alive, Callahan? There it was. Not performance now. Not entirely. For a few seconds, Reed saw a man broken in a way that anger had learned to wear like armor. Dane was not pretending all of it. That was the hard part. He had loved Rook once, or something close to love, but some loves, if left alone with shame too long, grew teeth. Then Dane said, I made that dog, and without me, he's nothing. Whatever pity Reed had allowed into the space between them went quiet. No, Reed said. Without you, he might finally become a dog again. Dane's face changed. Not rage yet. Something colder. By evening, Sergeant Holt had a new name: Cal Pritchard. Cal was a former veterinary technician who lived in a trailer behind an abandoned equipment yard south of town. He was 58, thin as a stripped branch, with a gray ponytail, tobacco-stained fingers, and watery eyes that avoided direct contact unless money or trouble forced them up. Years ago, he had lost his license after stealing medication from a clinic. Since then, he survived on odd animal care jobs, backroom favors, and the kind of reputation decent people pretended not to know about until they needed something. Holt and Miles found him before dark. Cal folded quickly. He said Dane had asked for a sedative strong enough to calm an agitated shepherd for transport. Dane had claimed Rook was being mistreated and needed to be removed before Laurel finished ruining him. Cal insisted he did not know Dane meant to take the dog by force. Holt did not look convinced. Reed heard the report from Laurel's office. He watched her absorb the information in silence. Then she looked toward Rook's room. "He was never just talking," she said. "No," Reed answered. "He was planning." That night, rain returned. The center closed early, but no one truly relaxed. Laurel checked locks twice. Reed walked the perimeter without making a show of it. Miles parked near the road. Holt arranged for an extra patrol to pass by after midnight. At 11:18, the north camera flickered. Just once. Then again, but a shadow appeared near the edge of the trees, outside the rear fence, exactly where the brush grew thick enough to hide a person from the main yard light. The figure did not approach the gate, did not try the lock, did not leave a package. He simply stood in the rain. Rook was already awake. From inside his room, he faced the north window, ears lifted, body rigid, Graham's coat behind him on the blanket. A thin sound slipped through the wet night. Not loud, not long. But Rook heard it. His body shuddered once. He did not run toward it. He did not hide from it. He stood there until morning, staring toward the dark line of Blackpine as if the past had called his name, and for the first time he was deciding whether to answer. The storm arrived before dark. It came over the Oregon mountains with a slow, heavy anger, rolling through the pine woods until the trees bent and shivered under it. Rain struck the roof of Laurel's rehabilitation center in hard silver lines, and the gutters overflowed before the evening shift had finished cleaning the kennels. Inside, the center felt smaller than usual. Laurel Ames moved from room to room with a flashlight clipped to her belt, checking locks, medication cabinets, and the latch on Rook's recovery room. Her face carried the calm of a veterinarian who had stitched torn flesh and held frightened animals through pain, but her eyes betrayed her. They kept returning to the north windows. Reed Callahan stood near the back hallway, listening. At 55, Reed had learned not to waste movement before danger chose its shape, and his old olive tactical combat shirt was darkened at the shoulders where rain had soaked through earlier. The worn fabric sat loose over his lean, disciplined frame, and his moss-green combat pants showed mud at the knees from walking the perimeter. His clean-shaven face looked carved from weathered stone in the low hallway light, square jaw tight, gray-blue eyes quiet but awake. He had walked the fence twice. The rear gate was locked. The kennel doors were secure. Deputy Miles Keene was parked down the road in a county cruiser, and Sergeant Dana Holt had arranged for a state patrol unit to pass by after midnight. On paper, they had done enough. Reed had never trusted paper. The power flickered once, then again. From Rook's room came the soft scrape of claws against the floor. Laurel turned. Reed raised one hand, not to stop her, only to slow the fear in the room. Rook was standing. The German shepherd's yellow and black coat looked dull under the dim emergency light. His black muzzle had gone gray along the edges, though he was only aged early by grief and old work. His amber-brown eyes were fixed not on Laurel, not on the window, but on the folded coat lying beside his blanket. Graham Hale's coat. Rook lowered his head, took the sleeve gently between his teeth, and dragged it across the floor. Laurel's breath caught. Rook! The dog moved slowly, painfully, each step stiff from weakness, until he reached the inside of the door. Then he dropped the coat there and stood over it, not hiding behind it, guarding it. Reed felt something tighten in his chest. Rook was not clinging to the dead tonight. He was bringing Graham with him, as if whatever was coming required the witness of the man who had loved him without commands. For a moment, no one moved, and the storm hammered the roof. Somewhere outside, a branch cracked. Then the north camera went black. Only for 3 seconds. Long enough. Reed moved. Laurel, he said, calm and low, soft lockdown. She did not argue. She turned toward Tessa, who stood frozen near the treatment counter, and gave instructions in a steady voice. Dogs inside, staff in the main building, phones charged. No one outside unless Reed or law enforcement called for it. Reed pulled his own phone and called Miles. North camera cut out, he said. Possible movement near the rear line. Miles answered over the sound of rain hitting his windshield. I'm rolling closer. Holt is 2 minutes behind me. Keep lights off until you're in position. Copy. Reed did not go chasing through the yard. He was not a deputy. He was not there to make an arrest, and he was there to keep a broken dog from being taken by a man who had mistaken ownership for love. He stepped toward Rook's room. Laurel was already there, one hand near the latch, her face pale. Don't grab him, Reed said. I know. But knowing and doing were different things when something you loved was standing at the edge of harm. Then the sound came. Thin, sharp, a whistle cutting through rain. Rook's body went rigid. His ears lifted, his mouth closed. Every part of him seemed to remember at once what his heart had spent years trying to survive. Laurel reached for the door. Reed caught her wrist gently. If you hold him now, he said, he may think this place is just another hand on the leash. Her eyes filled with helpless anger. And if I don't? Then we give him what Dane never did. She looked at him. A choice. Rook took one step toward the outer hallway. Reed lowered himself slightly, not blocking, not commanding. His voice became the kind of quiet that had carried men through smoke and dogs through rubble. Rook, he said, nobody here needs you to prove anything. The dog stopped. For one long second, the room held its breath. Then the rear door alarm chirped. Not a full breach, a pressure warning. Someone had touched the old service door near the storage wing. Reed moved to the hallway that led to the rear yard. Rain blew under the door in cold needles. Through the narrow window, he saw a shape beyond the covered run. Dane Varick stepped out of the darkness. He looked less like the polished man from the diner now. Rain had flattened his dark hair against his skull, and his charcoal jacket clung to his shoulders. His face was sharp and pale under the yard light, eyes bright with a feverish focus. In one hand he held a leash, and not the soft leash Graham had used, a narrow working line dark from rain. He did not look at Laurel first. He looked at Rook. "Come on, boy," Dane called. His voice was gentle, That gentleness did not make Reed trust him more. It made him colder. Rook trembled behind Reed, one paw on Graham's coat. Dane took another step. That's it. You remember. Reed opened the rear door only far enough to step into the covered space. Rain blew across his face. He kept both hands visible. You need to leave, Reed said. Dane's eyes flicked to him. This isn't your dog. It isn't yours either. Dane smiled, but the storm took the shape out of it. You don't know what we were. I know what he is now. He is wasting away in there. He ate today. That small truth seemed to strike Dane harder than an insult. His expression cracked. He ate for you? Reed did not answer, and Dane looked past him, toward Rook. His voice changed, tightening under the gentleness. Rook, front. The command landed like a stone. Rook's head dipped. His body remembered before his soul could object. He shifted forward half a step, then stopped when his paw pressed into Graham's coat. Laurel stood in the hallway behind him, crying silently now, one hand over her mouth. Dane saw the hesitation. The gentleness vanished. Front, he snapped. Rook flinched. Reed stepped fully between them. Dane's face hardened. Move. No. He's mine. He worked with you, Reed said. He trusted you. He saved people beside you. That doesn't make him property. Dane's jaw shook. You think you understand him because you sat beside him for a few days? No, Reed said. I understand men who need a dog to forgive what they can't face. For the first time, Dane looked afraid. Reed did not push, not yet. He said only one thing more. East Auxiliary Drift, yellow paint on the steel brace. The words cut through the storm. Dane went still. It was not a confession, not yet. But his face answered before his mouth did. The color drained beneath the rain. His eyes moved once toward the north woods. Reed saw it. So did Laurel. Dane lunged. Reed did not strike first. He turned with the movement, caught Dane's wrist, stepped inside the rush, and drove him down into the mud with controlled force. No rage, no punishment, just weight, leverage, and the old economy of a man who had learned that violence became dangerous the moment pride entered it. Dane fought like someone trained, but not centered. Grief made him strong for 3 seconds. Shame made him sloppy after that. Reed pinned his arm. Miles's cruiser lights flashed through the trees, still distant, but coming. Dane twisted, spitting rain and mud. You don't know what that place was like. Reed held him down. Then tell the truth. I heard him, Dane shouted. The yard went silent beneath the storm. Dane's voice broke open. I heard Rook. I knew he had something. I knew he wasn't wrong. Laurel made a sound behind Reed, small and wounded. Dane's face pressed into the mud, his words coming now like something torn loose after years underground. The east drift was coming down. Water everywhere. Men behind me. I made the call. I made the call and I didn't go back. Reed said nothing. Dane's voice dropped until it was almost lost in the rain. And afterward he kept pulling there. Every time. Every cursed time. Looking at me like he knew. The first patrol vehicle reached the yard. Miles came out fast, followed by Sergeant Dana Holt, her posture controlled, one hand near her holster, but not on it. They took Dane from Reed with practiced caution. Rook stood in the doorway. He had heard everything. The old dog did not run to Dane. He did not hide behind Laurel. He lowered his head, took one breath, and turned toward the north trail. "Rook," Laurel whispered. Reed looked at her. "He's not running away." Rook moved into the rain. Not like a young dog. Not with the strength he once had. He hurried a few steps, then slowed, sides heaving. His legs trembled. He stopped once near the fence and nearly sank down, but Reed stayed beside him with the leash loose, letting the dog choose the pace. Laurel followed with a flashlight and medical bag. Miles and Holt secured Dane with a second unit, then came after them. The trail to Blackpine was slick with mud. Branches slapped wet against Reed's sleeves. Rook pushed forward, stopping often, breathing hard. But he did not turn back. At the old auxiliary drift, storm water had washed loose a section of earth near the entrance. The brush sagged aside, revealing a narrow gap beneath a collapsed beam. The steel brace with the flaking yellow paint leaned in the shadows like a marker left by the dead. Rook reached it and began to scrape at the mud. Weakly at first, then harder. His claws dug into wet earth until Laurel knelt beside him and gently moved him back. Miles used a small rescue tool from his cruiser kit to clear the loosened stones. Holt held the light steady. Reed saw the corner of something metal. Together, they pulled out a small waterproof box, rusted along the edges, but sealed tight. No one spoke, and inside was a notebook, swollen from years of damp air, but protected enough that some pages remained readable. The name on the inside cover was Caleb Rusk. Reed turned carefully to the last pages. Much of the writing had blurred. Some lines were gone forever. But one page still held a few words, shaky and faint. Reed saw Rook's name. Beside him, the German shepherd lowered himself to the mud at the mouth of the mine. A low sound came from him. Not fear, not pain alone. Recognition. As Reed stared at the page, he understood that the old dog had not come back to Blackpine to prove what Dane had done. He had come back to find the man he had never stopped calling. The notebook from Blackpine did not look like something that had waited for justice. It looked small. That was what struck Reed first. After all the years, all the silence, all the fear Dane Varick had wrapped around that mine like barbed wire, the truth rested inside a weathered waterproof box, no larger than a lunch tin. Its metal edges were rusted orange. Mud clung to the hinges. The latch had to be worked open with the careful patience of someone handling an old bone. They brought it back to Laurel's center before dawn. The storm had weakened, though rain still tapped against the windows in tired little bursts. Rook lay on a thick blanket in the treatment room. Graham Hale's old coat tucked near his front paws. His yellow and black fur was damp, his chest rising and falling with slow effort. And he had walked farther than his body had wanted to go. And yet there was a strange calm in him now, as if some invisible leash had loosened. Laurel Ames stood beside the metal table with her arms folded tightly across her chest. Her face looked pale beneath the fluorescent light, but her hazel eyes did not turn away from the notebook. Deputy Miles Keene stood near the door, his wet navy jacket dripping onto the tile. Sergeant Dana Holt photographed the box, the latch, and each page before anyone touched more than necessary. When Holt finally nodded, Reed opened the notebook. Most pages were damaged. Some had swollen together. Some held only shadows of words. But a few near the back had survived inside the sealed box. The handwriting was shaky. Caleb Rusk had lived for hours after the rescue team left. He had written in fragments, water coming in, hard to breathe, light gone, dog outside, still hear him, still trying. No one spoke. The room seemed to shrink around those words. Caleb had not filled the pages with rage. He had not cursed the men who left him. That almost made it harder. His final notes carried the plain tenderness of a man who knew he was close to death and had chosen not to spend his last strength hating. He wrote about Miriam. He wrote that he was sorry about the shed roof he never fixed. He wrote that he hoped she would keep the red kettle because it made the kitchen look warm in winter. Then came the last line that could still be read clearly. If anyone finds this, tell the dog he tried enough. Laurel turned away and pressed both hands to her mouth. Miles lowered his head. For him, the words did not only belong to Caleb, and they reached backward through his father, through a rescue team that had done what the official story called necessary, and into the soft place where sons keep the idea that their fathers were always good. Reed said nothing for a long time. He thought of Mako. Not the end, not the smoke, not the order to pull back. He thought of Mako before all that, standing in yellow morning light beside a transport truck, tongue hanging out, waiting for Reed, as if the world were simple and loyalty could defeat anything it faced. Reed had spent years telling himself the decision had been tactical, correct, required. But grief did not care what name men gave it. On the blanket, Rook lifted his head. His amber eyes moved from the notebook to Reed's face. Reed knelt beside him. He did not touch him yet. He knew, Reed said quietly. Caleb knew you were there. Rook blinked once. Laurel made a soft, broken sound, not quite a sob. Later that morning, Miriam Rusk came to the center. She arrived in a gray-brown coat over a deep burgundy sweater, her dark hair tied loosely at the back of her neck, her face pale from years of learning how to wake up without answers. Miriam was not tall, not imposing, not the kind of woman grief had made loud. Grief had made her still. Her eyes held the careful steadiness of someone who had been disappointed by hope too many times to trust it quickly. Reed met her outside the treatment room. We found something, he said. She looked at him for one breath, then another. Is it Caleb? Part of what he left. When Miriam saw the notebook, she did not collapse. She did not cry out. She sat down as if her knees had simply forgotten their work. Laurel placed a chair behind her in time. Miriam touched the cover with 2 fingers, and not opened it, just touched it. He always wrote crooked when he was cold, she whispered. No one answered. She read only the parts Holt allowed her to read after the pages had been photographed. When she reached the lines about the dog, her eyes moved to Rook. Rook lay still, watching her. Miriam stood slowly and crossed the room. Laurel began to move as if to help, but Reed shook his head once. Miriam knelt beside Rook. The old German shepherd did not pull back. You stayed with him, she said. Rook's ears shifted. Miriam rested her hand near his paw, not on it, giving him the same courtesy Reed had offered from the beginning. You were with him longer than anyone else, she whispered. Rook lowered his head until his nose almost touched her sleeve. That was the moment Reed saw Laurel look away. Not because she was ashamed, but because mercy, when it finally arrives, can be too bright to stare at directly. By afternoon, Dane Varick was formally charged. He would not walk away with only pity wrapped around his name. There were charges for unlawful entry, harassment, attempted theft of an animal under legal care, and the sedative Cal Pritchard had admitted helping him obtain. Holt also opened a review into the Blackpine report and the chain of changes that had turned Rook's indication into failure. Dane was brought past the center before transfer, seated in the back of a patrol vehicle, while Holt spoke with Laurel. His face was gray with exhaustion. Rainwater had dried in his hair. Without his careful posture and polished grief, he looked smaller. Rook was outside under the covered entry with Reed, wrapped in a towel Laurel had placed over his back. Dane saw him through the cruiser window, and for 1 second, the old habit seemed to rise in him. The command, the call, the belief that if he said the right word, the dog would still come. But he did not speak it. He only lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry," Dane said through the half-open window. Rook did not go to him. He did not growl either. He simply stood beside Reed, old and tired and free from the need to answer. Days passed, though not cleanly. Healing did not arrive like a parade. Rook still refused food some mornings. He still startled when rain struck metal roofing. Sometimes he lay beside Graham's coat with his eyes open, waiting for footsteps that would never return. But something had changed. When fear came now, Rook looked for Reed. Not always. Not loudly. He would simply turn his head, find Reed in the room, and settle a little. As it was a small thing, but small things were how wounded creatures crossed impossible distances. Then Ellen Ward visited. She came with a paper bag of biscuits for the staff and nothing for Rook except the truth. The old woman sat beside him under the recovery room window, gray cardigan wrapped around her small frame, her white hair tucked neatly behind her ears. "You did everything a dog could do that morning," she told him. "You called me. You brought me to Graham. You did not leave him." Rook listened the way dogs listen when a voice has no demand inside it. Reed stood near the door. Ellen looked at him. "He needs to hear it from you too." Reed crouched beside Rook. For a moment the room disappeared. There was no Laurel, no Ellen, no Center, no storm-washed mountain road, and there was only a man who had carried one dog's death for too long, and another dog who had carried too many human failures as if they were his own. Reed placed his hand near Rook's head. Rook did not move away. "You tried enough," Reed said. The words were small, but Rook closed his eyes. Not from weakness, from rest. A few days later, Reed thought his work at the center was nearly finished. Dane was gone. Caleb's notebook had been given to Miriam. Rook had eaten a little more. He had slept through one whole afternoon without waking at every sound. But Laurel saw what Reed refused to see. Each time Reed left, Rook lay near the door. He did not bark, did not scratch, did not whine. He simply watched the road until Reed's truck disappeared beyond the pines. One late afternoon, after a soft rain, Laurel called Reed into the backyard. The grass was wet. Drops fell from the pine needles. Rook lay beneath the overhang with Graham's coat beside him, but his gaze followed Reed. Laurel stood with her hands in the pockets of her olive jacket. She looked tired, gentle, and braver than she felt. "I've treated a lot of dogs," she said. "Some need medicine. Some need structure. Some need time." Reed waited. "Rook needs a home." The words landed quietly, but Reed felt them all the way through. Laurel looked at him. "I want you to take him." He looked away. "He needs someone trained. He has that here, and he'll still have me. I'll check him. I'll help with everything." Her voice softened. "But he chose you, Reed. Not loudly, not like a young dog. But he did." Reed could not answer. The old fear moved in him. Mako. Loss. the terrible cost of loving something that might not stay. Then Rook rose. Slowly, with stiff legs and tired bones, he crossed the wet yard, and he stopped beside Reed's boots, lowered his head, and rested his muzzle against Reed's pant leg. No command, no leash, no one telling him where to go. Reed bent slowly and stopped his hand in the air, giving Rook the right to refuse. Rook did not refuse, so Reed touched his head. "I'll take him home," Reed said. When Reed drove away that evening, Graham's coat lay on the back seat beside Rook's blanket. Laurel stood by the center door and smiled even though her eyes shone. Reed's cabin waited at the edge of the forest. He placed a bowl of soft food on the porch. Rook sniffed it, looked at Reed, then ate a few small bites. Not much. Enough. Afterward, Rook lay near the door, not pressed into a corner, not trembling when rain whispered far off in the trees. Reed sat beside him without touching him. There were no medals, no grand promises, no music swelling in the dark. Only a man who had lost a dog, and a dog who had lost too many people, learning together that staying was also a kind of courage. And for Rook, that was enough to call the place home. Here is the final message in English. In the end, Rook's story reminds us that some wounds are carried in silence. Not every broken heart cries out. Some simply stop eating, stop trusting, stop walking toward the door. But sometimes, by God's grace, the right person arrives at the right moment. Not with loud promises, not with force, but with patience, mercy, and a quiet willingness to sit beside the pain until hope dares to breathe again. Rook was never a failure. He had tried enough. He had loved enough. He had stayed loyal even when people misunderstood him. And maybe that is the miracle in this story, that God can still bring truth out of buried places, healing out of old sorrow, and a new home to a soul that thought it had been forgotten. In our own lives, we may meet people who are like Rook, tired from carrying grief no one can see, and we may also be like Reed, wounded by something we could not save, still wondering if we did enough. But this story reminds us that love is not always about fixing everything. Sometimes love is simply staying, listening, and giving another heart the courage to live one more day. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who believes in loyalty, second chances, and the quiet miracles God still places in our path. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Your words help keep these stories alive. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories of courage, faith, healing, and the unbreakable bond between humans and dogs. May God bless you, protect your home, comfort your heart, and watch over every loyal soul walking beside you.